This is the third presentation in a series about coherence in writing. Coherent communication involves clear, logical, consistent linkage from one thought to the next throughout the communication. In this presentation, we look at coherence between sentences, and we do so using these strategies. Firstly, repetition. In the first movie, we looked at the technique of linking to the old, then progressing to the new. Sometimes we might even do this as neatly as starting the sentence with a link to what came before and ending the sentence with the new information. That's what we did in the passage about metals in the environment. We make those links between new and old through repeating a word or phrase in the old part of the sentence from what we had used in the new part of the previous sentence. For example, metals, soil, not absorb metals or unabsorbed metals. In academic writing, the general rule is to repeat the exact term in these old-new linkages, whereas in more popular writing, synonyms tend to be preferred. In both academic and popular writing, pronouns can be used to imply repetition in this old-new chain. Here's an example of a coherently written text where I've highlighted the key terms for you, and I've also put in the first link between old and new. Notice that uses a pronoun. The pronoun they is a repetition of many people, and it links sentence 2 to sentence 1. What you need to do is to pause this movie and then draw in more arrows showing links throughout the text. Remember that you can download this text as well as all the text used in the series and notes as well by clicking on the link below this movie. It refers to global warming. Danger is a synonym of threat. This threat uses a pronoun, this, as well as a synonym to danger and a direct repetition of the word threat. And in that way, it links the thought in the third sentence to what was said in the first two sentences. Additionally, future is a synonym for generations to come, linking sentences 2 and 3. And then the final sentence links to the rest through the repetition of global warming and future. Here's the whole paragraph. Read it again, noticing how these repetitions, which include direct repetitions and pronouns and synonyms, how these repetitions help one to understand the message as a whole. Now let's move on to the third technique for promoting coherence between sentences, transitions. Here I've given a number of transitions or sentence connectors and the purpose that each one serves. Firstly, however, therefore, for example, those are common transition words that we often use. It helps to expand your repertoire and use more than just these commonly used ones though. But it's important to do so in a logical manner and with a lot of thought, because transition words are very important in conveying the logic of the connections between the successive sentences. And if you use them well, that enhances coherence by clarifying the relationships between thoughts. But if you use them badly, you can really confuse your reader because it breaks coherence and it breaks logic. So it's really important to put a lot of thought in them. To help us develop these skills, here's an exercise. Fill in the appropriate transitions for each gap. Remember, you can download this as well as all the exercises in the link below. The first thing to notice is that Mercury and Gemini are two successive projects within the US manned space exploration project, and each of them has specific major goals. So we draw attention to that fact as well as to the timeline by introducing the Mercury project with first of all, or to begin with, or something like that. And then we move on to the Gemini project by introducing it with something like after that, or maybe second, then. But notice those transitions would not work between the transition of the first and the second point, because they are both still referring to the Mercury project. So something like after that or second or then wouldn't have made sense there. Instead, there we use some kind of continuation link, like moreover, in addition, also. Notice that it would also not be appropriate to use a contrast link, like however, because we're still referring to the same project, Mercury. So the two sentences are still referring referring to the same aim, so we don't want to draw attention to differences, but rather to continuity. Also here, it wouldn't be appropriate to use a cause-effect link, something like therefore or consequently. In contrast, this link here is about a cause-effect relationship. The aim of Gemini was to see if people could work in space, and that caused them to send the astronauts out for spacewalks. So this sentence follows from this sentence in a cause-effect relationship, and that's why therefore is appropriate here. However, wouldn't have been appropriate here, because that would have suggested a contrast rather than agreement between these two sentences. Here, in other words or in fact, is appropriate, because this sentence says what spacewalks are, just using other words. Additionally or furthermore would not have been appropriate here, because they would have implied that floating outside a spacecraft in a spacesuit connected by a tether is something other than a spacewalk, rather than being the same thing, just stated in other words. As I've already pointed out, this example doesn't only illustrate the use of transitions, but also the technique of making the sequence clear, first of all, after that. However, let's now turn our attention more fully to this technique of ordering things. There are different ways to order things. In the previous example, we ordered things according to time, from earliest to latest. That was appropriate in that example because it was about a historical description and also a description of the development of processes which successively developed an understanding of travel to space. Time ordering is particularly appropriate for process descriptions, for example, describing how a device or a procedure works. One can also order things spatially. For example, I'm working through this list using spatial ordering, starting at the top of the list and working downward. And then a third way of ordering things can be sequential ordering. For example, most general to most specific, most familiar to least familiar, least important to most important. Here's a passage to practice ordering. Pause the movie while you place these sentences in the sequence which makes the paragraph most coherent. Remember, you can download this activity as well as all the activities and notes in the series by clicking the link below this movie. Here's my suggestion. Notice that we're using sequential ordering in which we start with the most general, broad problems in the country, and we end with the specific agricultural problem of limited water. Notice the use of the other techniques we've been discussing too. Firstly, repetition to link sentences. Problems, rural, irrigation. Secondly, use of pronouns. This and these. Thirdly, use of transitions. The first fact, as a result, and. So we've seen that it's important to have coherence between words by having consistency of form, point of view, and tense. And it's important to have coherence between sentences. And devices we can use to help us with that are repetition, use of pronouns, transitions, and use of a logical order. In a similar way, we need to use these techniques between paragraphs and between chapters to promote coherence on a larger scale within text. When we look at coherence between chapters, it especially becomes important to think of coherence of content, particularly if this is coherence between chapters in academic writing, for example, within a thesis. We need to pay a lot of attention to coherence between the content of our questions, our methodology, our findings, discussion, and the argument we make in our conclusion and our claim to knowledge. That's beyond the scope of this course, because this course was about writing techniques. Watch out for another series where we look at that coherence in content between chapters. In the meantime, happy writing, like and subscribe, and leave comments below.